Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very accomplished, a well-known, and a respected and recognized author and academic from Bangalore, India, Saiswaroopa Iyer. Sai, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. That's a very flattering introduction, Ashutoshji, and
Thank you.
really honored to be a part of this podcast. I've seen a couple of videos on your channel, and you have a very unique way of, I think, recording wisdom.
Thank
So,
you.
looking forward.
Thank you so much. Sai is an author and an academic. She's an author of 5 best-selling novels based on ancient Indian women protagonists. And all of you know, I've always been very partial to authors. She's the recipient of the Sri Shakti Award for her contribution to Indian literature. And she's also trained as a Carnatic classical musician. So, Sai, what an amazing journey. And as I was reading about you, you moved from venture capital to Vedic storytelling. How did this transition unfold for you?
I guess storytelling was always a part of my life. It came from my family, rather. So I am, fortunately or unfortunately, I'm the eldest cousin, on either side of my mother's
Mm,
as well as my father. So
mm,
whenever there's a family gathering, all the cousins used to meet up. I used to be the default storyteller, keep them distracted,
mm.
not disturb others and stuff like that. And that's how it started. My grandparents, parents, all of them are seeped into, Indian knowledge systems.
Mm.
I know
Yeah.
that's the modern term,
Mm,
but the civilizational part of it.
mm.
So yeah, that has always been a part of my
Amazing.
life. It's just that I had never, looked at it as a career. I
Mm.
always looked at it as,
Something
a
you would
part of
do.
me.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
But how has
So,
your
but then,
background in economics and management
yes,
influenced your
yes.
storytelling or development of your characters?
More or less, yes. I don't have any training in literature.
Mm.
So more or less, I would say my exposure in management, it's more with respect to startups, not the exact industry as such. But when I was working in that venture capital firm as an analyst,
Mm.
the every pitch comes to me first before going to the next stage.
Right. Right.
So, it was a very short experience, but I would have ended up looking at about 300 to 350 pitches, in that frame of
Mm.
time.
Mm.
And that taught me something that opportunities lie everywhere.
Mm.
Entrepreneurs, they don't look for the next big boom. They just
Mm.
look for problems and they try to solve them.
Mm.
So that itself, like, was a call for me that I should be doing something in which I am a natural at, right? Rather than, looking at, what's the market
Yeah.
trend, what is the, what are people looking to fund, where are the jobs, and, the typical management
Yeah.
thinking.
Yeah.
So that's something which, made me think and look within a lot.
Mm.
And I gathered I'm a storyteller, and that has to, come
Absolutely.
out.
Absolutely. But another thing that fascinated me when I was reading about you was that your novels are revolve around ancient Indian women protagonists. Why did you decide to choose this particular genre?
I think it just built up as I was writing my first book.
Mhm.
More or less, I think I stuck to this genre because there's a lot of misunderstanding. I know now it's a lot better than what it used to be,
Yeah.
say 10 years ago.
Mm.
But there was a lot of misunderstanding, around women in Indian civilization,
Yeah.
right? We had this imported notions of patriarchy, imported
Correct.
notions of casteism.
Mm.
I don't think the social, uh, the social engineering part of India, the modern, it never tried to understand the ancient Indian society the way it was. So it was just in too much of a hurry trying to force fit India into the models that existed in the West.
Mm.
right? So in that force fitting, I think we lost a lot of nuance and a lot of very valuable understanding that we
Mm,
needed to
mm,
move forward,
mm. Amazing.
right? And women is the
Absolutely.
status of women, and
Yeah.
the story, the trajectories of women are very important part of
Correct.
this.
Correct.
uh,
And very well said. Very well said.
mhm.
But moving on, what core Indic philosophical ideas have generally guided your storytelling?
Yeah. So it's I haven't exactly looked for a core philosophical idea, though the key word everywhere is dharma,
Hmm.
and that's one word which has always fascinated me
Hmm.
because it's a non-translatable to be when we look
Correct.
at
Hmm.
someone can understand it as a duty,
Hmm.
someone understands it as a religion, someone understands it as a code or ethics or something like that, and
Hmm. Hmm.
someone understands it as law,
Hmm.
right? And we can say, no, this is not that, but this is necessary but not sufficient understanding of dharma. So
Yeah.
I remember that that fable by Ramakrishna Paramhamsa ji, where blind children are taken to experience an elephant,
Correct.
and each child gets to touch a part of the elephant and
Absolutely.
forms that kind of an image, like
Yes.
oh, elephant is like a big fan because he has
Yeah.
just just
Yeah.
touched the ear of the
Yeah.
elephant.
Yeah.
But elephant is that and much more,
Correct.
right? So dharma is that and much more.
Absolutely.
And bring that that understanding of dharma and the women's role in standing for dharma.
Hmm.
So even bit of feminist literature that I had read, they were trying to, most of the authors that I had it, I think they belong to 70s or 80s. So even when they were looking at, I don't want to name them, I do respect
Yeah.
them, though I,
Hmm. Hmm.
disagree
Hmm.
with a lot of
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah.
So, those people who had also tried telling stories from Mahabharata, Ramayana,
Hmm.
uh, I would say the content will, might have been inspired from Ramayana, but the understanding is very much rooted in the 70s and 80s. So a lot of feminist literature was based in that, 70s and 80s India,
Hmm.
pre-liberalized, where the population had to cope up with a lot of scarcity. So that angst, it didn't belong in ancient India,
Hmm.
right? So I found a lot of that. There was a need to revisit ancient India, revisit Mahabharata,
Yeah.
understand what it was,
Hmm.
before jumping into conclusions,
Yeah.
right? There is a lot of, and Mahabharata has its own, set of riddles. It takes a lifetime to decode each of the
Absolutely.
riddles, and it's not a, it's a fascinating process
Absolutely.
exploring Mahabharata,
Yeah.
and my storytelling has been a part of the whole
Absolutely
journey.
right. I can keep reading and I can keep listening to the Mahabharata, and every time I discover something new in it. But
Something new, yes.
Sai, moving on, how do you handle the moral ambiguity in characters, especially when they are in
Huh.
epic or historical settings? And we have this in almost every character of our scriptures.
Yes, yes, yes. The ambiguity is what makes anyone human, right,
Hmm.
Ashutosh?
Hmm.
So it's the decision making, right? And whenever I make a choice, it's the choice is not about right or wrong. They are not a black and white, but
Yeah.
the choice is always about short term versus long term.
Hmm.
Is it only me or is it a greater choice? So
Hmm.
am I sacrificing something greater for me?
Hmm.
That makes me the villain. But am
Hmm.
I sacrificing something of mine for a greater cause? Right? That makes me the hero.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So there are these decision making frameworks, though we have to kind of really take out the framework part, a wisdom part of it, and work towards it.
Hmm. Hmm.
But that's what I think propelled the uh, decision making of ancient people. So when you say ambiguity, the first example that strikes me is of Yudhishthira from
Hmm.
Mahabharata, right?
Yeah.
So in the war, he has to tell a lie
Hmm.
to Drona,
Yeah.
saying your son is dead, Ashwatthama. So there is
Correct.
this half lie that comes. right? And that's one of the most poignant points of the epic, if
Mm,
I would say.
mm,
So he has to protect the soldiers who are fighting for him.
correct.
And for that, he has to sacrifice his moral standpoint, and that,
Right.
the something that he has been proud of, something he has been proudly following, facing a lot of difficulties still there. He has to sacrifice that, to protect his soldiers, right?
Mm,
So that is the poignant part of decision making that, each hero or a leader or whoever,
yeah.
you want to call,
Mm,
makes. And that's what makes it very fascinating. Is Was he right? Was he wrong? We can keep on,
absolutely.
debating.
Correct. It is always the context which is much more important. And
Yes, yes.
very well said. But in your process for interpreting ancient texts with some
Hmm.
creative liberty, how do you
Hmm.
manage to say respectful of the tradition?
That's yeah, it's an interesting question. I get asked of this a lot.
Mm,
I think it matters, when we start, the respect for
mm,
characters
mm,
matters a lot, and how much we can hold back our own biases and
mm,
try to see the world in each of the characters'
mm,
point of view. That's something which, which defines how rounded our storytelling is.
mm,
And of course, we have, the Purushartha, the Panchakosha, and the understanding of self, which is rooted
mm,
in Indian
mm.
philosophy,
Very
right?
interesting.
And
Yeah.
Shansa. So there is, as you keep reading, you understand, the way people used to look at the world.
Mm,
And the storyteller has this duty to, step into the shoe of
mm,
those
mm.
characters. Firstly, rather than, hold on to our biases,
Yeah, yeah.
or look at them from a 21st century, lens,
Mm, very
right?
interesting.
Otherwise, we would be culling out a lot of wisdom which would be useful for us.
Correct. Correct. Very well
So
said.
that's one thing.
Mm,
Yes, and also I would say, because I've been reading Mahabharata since my childhood, there is a sort of kinship I feel,
yeah.
like these are my people.
Mm.
So that kind of gives me, I know it's not exactly a permissible,
No, but
non-permissible part of, we can't talk about it like that. But it's just that, when if I am a very close friend of yours, I take certain liberties. If
absolutely.
we are just introduced, I don't think I dare take those
Correct.
liberties, right?
Correct. Correct.
So it's about that as well.
Yes. Yes. And that is the power of our country. We can interpret our scriptures the way we want to interpret them based on our own understanding and our own context. But what a great response. Thank you. Again, when I was reading about you, I was reading about the legend of Vishypala. Uh,
Hmm.
and this is virtually unknown. I had to actually read a little more to understand. How did you discover her story and decide to reimagine it in Avishi?
So that's a very interesting part. So I was writing Abhaya. That's my first book, which is based on, Narakasura Vadha
Mm,
legend from Bhagavata.
yeah.
So I was building up the backstory, and I had a particular scene where, my heroine, Abhaya, she's a 7, 8 year old girl, and she doesn't have a mother. Her father is trying to be both the parents, and he's trying to make her eat lunch. And it's a typical Indian setup where somebody, the elder who is trying to feed the kid, is trying to tell a story, and
Mm,
things like that. Now her father is a king. Logically, he would want to talk about some stories of some bravery and,
mm,
some barriers and all, right? And now this story is set in the Mahabharata, so I have to go back and, fetch an older story.
mm.
And then I wanted, okay, because it's a girl,
Yeah.
he would talk about some brave woman of the past. And now, who should that woman be?
Mm,
Some warrior woman older than Mahabharata. So I had Kaikeyi, I had Savitri.
mm.
But both these stories need a lot more nuance. They are not suited for a 7 year old,
True.
child. So I just wanted, more adventurous. I started, Googling, reading up, Vedic. Then, surprisingly, there was this journal on prosthetics, some conference from some medical university. I forgot the name, but I know that it's some
Mm, mm.
Israeli medical journal
Mm.
on prosthetics. And it was a very big PDF with hundreds of pages. All the papers were there. And
Mm.
but the introduction part of that,
Mm.
how prosthetics was, invented or something.
Mm. Mm.
That section quoted Rigveda and
Ah,
Queen Vishpala.
wow.
Then I was like, okay, why don't we know this?
Mm.
I mean, we should be talking about this rather than, some non-existent, fantasies about
Correct.
surgery. And
Correct.
of course, surgery existed in the times
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
Sushruta and, Charaka and those.
Mm.
But it's like, and the striking part of the story of Vishpala is it's not a miracle. It's a scientific advancement. The
Mm.
Ashwini Kumara, so she's a queen who's battling and loses her leg. Her leg is cut
Mm.
off,
Mm.
and Ashwini Kumaras give her a prosthetic leg made
Wow.
of a ayasa. Ayasa is a metal that gets attracted to a magnet,
Mm.
ayaskanta,
Mm.
right? So it can be copper, it can be iron. Now historians are free to debate about, which period and what metal
Yeah.
and what are
Yeah.
the metallurgy techniques. But it's just there that it's not a miracle. If it was a miracle, the leg
Mm.
would have become whole. They were gods.
Mm. How amazing.
But no, they fitted a metal leg.
Mm.
So
Amazing.
that's a surgical process,
Amazing.
right? And that itself was so compelling that I thought, okay, I should explore this story next.
Mm.
And it was a long exploration because other than these two, three details,
Mm.
that it is Kela's battle, we don't know who was Kela. So there's not much told about her.
Mm. Mm.
And actually, many of the Vedic stories they get revisited in the Ramayana, Mahabharata,
Mm.
Puranas with their
Mm.
own with some differences. But
Mm.
this was that one story which never got revisited.
Mm. Amazing.
So there was not much material around,
Right.
and
Right. And yet you
so that's
managed to
how
weave,
it
these
happened.
ancient concepts like prosthetics and democratic governance into into a very, very compelling narrative. How did you do that?
So democratics was there a part of was always a part of our
Country.
governance
Yeah. Yeah.
structures. It's uh, like if we go back to the Mahabharata, the Yadavas. I won't call them Krishna's side, right?
Mm.
They were, I won't call them democracy, but they were a form of a republican. They
Mm.
did not follow monarchy, right? They had these powerful,
Yeah.
it's something between an oligarchy and a republic.
Right.
They didn't exactly have elections every 5 years.
Mm.
But then there was representation of everyone.
Mm.
And women used to speak very bravely in the Sabha.
Mm.
And there was a lot of that representation was given a lot of weightage. And
Mm.
it goes way back, right? So I was trying to understand, if it goes even way back, as the what you say, the Shodasha Mahajanapadas, as the society had become very sophisticated. But as we go backward,
Mm.
we come across these egalitarian terms about how women used to speak in the Sabha. How every profession is given its space. Like if you look at explore Sri Rudram, Namakam Chamakam, and
Mm.
there Lord Shiva is, the seeker sees Lord Shiva in each and every entity of the universe, each
Mm.
and every profession,
Mm.
right? So that's what was the inspiration for me in envisaging an
Yeah.
ancient democratic system. So
Right.
it may not have these sophisticated systems of how many elections and what is the because
Correct.
I just had a village, so
Correct.
I had to look at how representation is taken, and
Mm.
there were certain inspirations from the Greek art as well.
Mm.
So I had visited Kriti, the Greek island, and
Mm.
there was a certain represent, and we were Greek civilization and Indian civilization are not, not much apart. They had their own philosophy, we had our own, and
Yeah.
a lot had has a lot of common aspects were there.
Mm.
So obviously, a lot of common aspects should have existed in the technological aspects and sociological aspects, right?
Mm. Yeah.
So yes, all that
Fascinating. Fascinating.
helped. build
But
the
but an, but
ancient.
an overarching question for you, given the amount of research you've done on the Vedas, do you believe Vedic India was more progressive in some areas than we give it credit today?
Okay, so I see the word progressive has a lot of multiple
Yeah,
connotations,
yeah.
but I would say Vedic India was much more balanced,
Okay.
right?
And help
Much
me
more
understand that.
harmonious,
Mm,
much
mm,
more balanced,
mm.
because society was structured in such a way that everybody contributes to the larger good,
Correct.
right? So I know we love to demonize caste today. The way we understood it from the Western lens also is not a, it's not a flattering, system.
Mm,
But if we understand Varna and Ashrama
mm,
in the light of Purushartha,
mm,
right? The Chaturvarna, the Chaturashramas,
mm,
and the Purushartha. So there is a right age, right segment, and the right goal to
mm,
pursue,
mm,
so that you belong to the larger whole, so that you contribute to the larger whole,
mm,
and so that the larger whole also sustains you. And this
mm,
is what is Dharma,
mm.
right?
Amazing.
That's where, yes. And also to be very, the social systems were not exactly, set in stone. There was a lot of evolution, lot of debate, lot of exceptions to the
Mm,
norm, a lot of evolution of the norm that
yeah,
has taken
yeah,
place
yeah.
over the period. So my natal community, if I have to quote, it's a Komati community from South India,
Mm,
right? We got the, I don't know, right is not the right word, but just but we kind of started wearing the sacred thread. The men in our community started wearing the sacred thread roughly about 150, 180 years ago.
okay.
Yeah, there
Mm,
was a certain social movement
mm,
because,
mm, mm,
we were traders and
mm.
seafaring, and all that. That required a lot of sea travel.
Yeah.
So the rituals that comes with the sacred thread, it was
Mm,
not very convenient to practice them. But then
mm,
the East India Company came and we became more land bound. And it was actually the Brahmanas who encouraged this community. Start, hey, why don't you, kind of accept this
mm,
ritual
mm.
and start, because once one wears a sacred thread, they can be the yajamana of a yajna.
Correct.
So that's how the community gets to
Mm.
contribute to this this whole system.
Very
So it was
interesting.
actually, so this goes against the whole brand of, oh, Brahminical patriarchy. They did
Mm,
not allow
mm.
anybody. So this is a community which was happy doing its own business, but was invited by the Vaidiki Brahmanas
Correct.
to be, hey, be a part of this,
Very interesting.
you know,
Very
wonderful
interesting.
system.
Very interesting. So I have time for two more
So,
questions for you.
sure.
Um, I want to talk to you about your book, The Daughter of Mura.
Ah,
Uh, how did you approach the character of Ghatotkach, often seen only as a warrior in other texts?
hmm, okay. Thank you for asking me this question, because somehow, most of my interviews, we don't get much time to focus on this book.
Mm, mm,
Looking at Gatotkacha, right? Mahabharata's introduction, no, introduction is fine, but Gatotkacha's death in
mm,
Mahabharata, right? That's a pinnacle of heroism.
mm.
You just, even he served his side even in death,
Yeah.
right? So
Mm,
that makes it for a very what do you say, emotional end, heroic end,
mm,
right? So when such heroic deaths are explored,
mm.
it kind of makes me look back into what could have, they have been as normal people. What could their normal life have been?
Yeah.
And Ghatotkacha has this distinction because he did not exactly grow up with his father.
Mm,
He grew up with his mother.
yeah.
That's a specific Rakshasa community which had a semi-matriarchal structure,
Yeah. Mm,
right? So his mother was the leader of his tribe.
mm, mm,
And and now look at, so they were growing, like they were living away from his father, that is Bhima and the Pandavas
mm,
setting up.
mm.
Now there's this event called Rajasuya where, the whole of the family is expected to come and grace the occasion. And so, what can somebody who is brought up in a very remote location, mostly away from the larger civilization, feel when he suddenly realizes that he's a part of such a large family
And the eldest.
and the eldest in
And the
his
eldest.
generation?
Yeah.
Right, and that kind of it was fascinating to approach and explore his emotional side of Gatotkacha. And also, yes, the story of him marrying the daughter of Mura, the basic story comes from the Skanda Purana,
Mm.
where Lord Krishna suggests this match, and she is also quite a warrior, asura princess, not exactly a princess, but noble woman,
Mm.
asura
Mm.
noble woman,
Mm.
guarding Kamakhya. And there is, she has this thing of, I'll marry only somebody who can defeat me in war, kind
Mm.
of
Mm.
this one. And Gatotkacha actually defeats her and marries her. There's a lot of very unique romantic aspect of that.
Mm. Mm.
The other interesting part is because Mura is somebody Krishna killed, the daughter is
Yeah.
bound to have a certain, enmity towards Lord Krishna. So, how
Mm.
would she marry someone who's related to Lord Krishna? That was
Mm.
also an
Yeah. Yeah. Very
interesting
interesting.
aspect.
You have so much knowledge, Sai. I could just keep on speaking to you,
Oh,
but
you're
you
being really
know,
kind, Ashutosh.
I would, but given the time, I can only ask you one more question. I was trying to debate what to
Sure.
ask you, but I thought I'm going to ask you an overall question.
Yeah.
What is your perspective on the role of feminine power in the Mahabharata?
Role of feminine power in the Mahabharata. That's really interesting.
Hmm.
So I'm a Devi Upasika, so I'm bound to have a bit of a favorable bias towards the
Absolutely.
divine feminine
Yeah.
uh, part of it. But coming to the feminine power, I think women have actually shaped the story of Mahabharata.
Hmm.
And this
Correct.
is not to put down the role of men. They
No,
had a lot
absolutely.
of
But
role.
you're right. I agree with you.
Uh, but whenever there is a key woman character entering the
Hmm.
scene, right, the direction of the story changes. So, be it Gandhari getting the boon of 100 sons, right? That's changing. Be it Kunti getting the boon of, invoking any god to give her a son, that changes. Be it Draupadi with, that, prophecy of, marrying five people and being the
Yeah.
reason for destruction of, Adharma. That
Hmm.
is a very, very, so every time there is a Amba,
Hmm. Yeah.
right, with her own,
Come.
kind of reborn. And Amba signifies that kind of a character where nobody is going to help you. You have to rescue your own, and you have to fight for
Hmm.
what belongs to you, and you have to fight for the injustice that has been done to you. So
Hmm.
that so each of these women have shaped the
Correct. Correct.
story of Mahabharata.
Yeah.
So that way, there is a lot of partnership between genders.
Hmm.
When I say partnership, I'm not saying everything is hunky dory. There's a lot of conflict, there is a lot of debate, and especially I want to bring to the notice of your viewers one particular debate in the Vanaparva. That
Hmm.
is, after Pandavas lose their kingdom, there's a lot of debate that happens between Yudhishthira and Draupadi,
Hmm.
Yudhishthira and his brothers.
Hmm.
And it's a very open debate where people vent their emotions as well as invoke wisdom,
Hmm.
right? So where Draupadi, is actually, we see the intellectual prowess of Draupadi. It's not
Hmm.
that, the victim of whatever circumstances kind of a side that we
Yeah.
see. So
Hmm.
we see her as that intellectual powerhouse. So that's
Hmm.
the women of Mahabharata
Amazing.
for me, game
Amazing.
changers.
And what an amazing response. Thank you. But on that note, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me about your amazing journey. I thought we covered some incredible ground based on your knowledge of your books, the Rig Veda and the Mahabharata. And I'm sure there's so much more I can talk to you. Maybe I'll reach out to you after a few months to do another conversation with you.
It
But
has
thank
been
you.
an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, and thank you to your viewers. And please keep doing this amazing work. I'll look forward for other sessions also, Ashutosh.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.